But eBay comes along and says, well, if you want to edge out your competition, pay extra. So what's the change and why is it upsetting sellers? Well, eBay has found yet another way to collect more money under the promoted listing program. It will be rare that you will not be paying a promoted listing. It's like it's become the new norm. When you look at eBay's promoted listings and its 10-year history and all the changes, and you ask yourself, am I still paying for a fair service? Now that's an important question because the percentage keeps climbing. So as eBay takes more and more money, am I getting more and more sales? Am I making more and more money? And I don't think so. Yesterday, I received 2 email messages from eBay saying they were changing the promoted listing policy. It's been expected ever since they rolled it out in places in Europe and Australia. Sellers here in the US have been curious about whether we would see it. Now, interestingly enough, eBay did a seller update recently. It wasn't mentioned. Makes me think they're trying to slip the change in under the wire like a thief in the night. Because I often think about eBay promoted listing programs, and there are different versions, just simply a way for them to take my money. But after it was introduced, I avoided it for some time. And finally, I relented. When my sales were down and I wasn't getting as many views, I relented and agreed to 1%. And then when they came along and said, well, 2%'s the new minimum, 2%'s the new 1%, I updated and I made my listings 2%. Well, over time since then, it's edged up. And I think on average I pay about 5%. But I've never been convinced that I'm getting my worth, my 5% worth, out of the promoted listing program. But I do believe if I didn't use it, I would make fewer sales. Why? Because eBay hides your listings. They bury it in the volume, and they'll tell you right in the template, you've picked a low percentage, and low percentages don't get put in front of buyers. Now that the recommendations are rarely in the single digit, when you look at your template and eBay gives you a recommendation in a specific category about how high you should put in your promoted listing percentage to compete, it's 12%, 15%. I've seen 20%. So right there, they're saying, give us more money. And if you look below that and you read it, it says, your ad rate is low. If you don't give us money, we're not going to show your listing to people. I mean, it's right there on the template. There's been a 10-year history watching eBay promoted listings, the program, change, develop, take more of my money as an eBay reseller. It was introduced in 2015. And ever since, we've been watching it, in some instances using it, reluctantly, because I've always felt that the program at its core is not what it's supposed to be. Recently, I've been doing some videos about advertising and the use of advertising in different media forms, and about whether advertising helps sell product. Because that's the bottom line. We pay eBay to help sell our product as resellers. And eBay makes money off us. It's not the only way I've ever sold. I've used lots of other methods, including live auctions. And each one takes a commission. A couple of exceptions. Facebook and Craigslist don't charge us for the service. But in general, places that sell your product take a percentage. The percentage varies with what they can do, how big a crowd they can draw, whether they can get your product in front of people and make you money. And in general, as a reseller, I'm okay with the idea of paying a promotion fee or an advertising fee that is reasonable and increases my sales. I consider it a cost of doing business. The idea is the more you promote, the more you advertise, the more attention you draw. In one of the videos I recently did, I use this as a teaching tool. It says, what happens if you don't advertise? Nothing. It's in the paper. And it's put out by the people who produce the paper. So it's a little self-promoting. But the concept is there. If promoting, if advertising gets you the sales you're looking for and makes you more money, then what you pay for that service could be fair and worthwhile. But the questions come into play when you look at eBay's promoted listings and its 10-year history and all the changes, and you ask yourself, am I still paying for a fair service? Now, that's an important question because the percentage keeps climbing. So as eBay takes more and more money, am I getting more and more sales? Am I making more and more money? And I don't think so. And that's why I say in the 10 years since 2015, when eBay came up with the idea of promoted listings to put one seller's product out ahead of other sellers, there have been some issues with it. When they first introduced the program, I was very reluctant. I was not a fan of the idea. I pay a subscription fee. I believed, and still do, that the best listings with the best prices and the best terms should be shown to the buyers. Best match. If I've got the best product, if I've got the best price, if I've got the best shipping and return policies, I should sell. I should be at the top. The equivalent of what Amazon calls the buy box. My listings should rise. If I'm not willing to do the things like offer free returns or ship out in one day, then my listings should fall behind those people who do. But that's not really the way the program worked out. It's the way they tried to sell it to us, just like any other advertising program. In fact, after they introduced it, I was getting a phone call, every week or so from a lady from eBay out of their business office. They were a smaller company in those days. But she would call me and she would tell me all about this new program of advertising that they had called promoted listings. The fee in those days was 1% minimum. You could go higher. But she would say that if I was willing to contribute 1%, my listing would be shown ahead of those who weren't using promoted listings, and the attention would be drawn to my product and I would make more sales. Now, on the surface, that sounds fantastic, especially in a market where you're competing against pages of the same product. If you're a buyer who likes items with UPC codes, new old stock, retail arbitrage, and you got a lot of competition for retail arbitraged items, a Walmart or a Target discontinues a product, they put it on clearance, first people in the door who see it grab it all, they get it up on eBay, they've got a lot of it. Problem is, nationwide, all the other Walmarts and Targets are dropping the same product. So for those products, you've got a lot of competition. So advertising and spending a little more money on advertising sounds good. You can always pass that extra cost on to your buyer anyway. But if you're selling in a niche where you're doing vintage items, old industrial parts, tools, there isn't as much of any given product on eBay. So you think, well, if the search results return an item because I've got the only one or one of very few, and my photos are good and my description is good, my condition codes are accurate, and I've got a reasonable shipping time, then I would be competitive. I don't need to advertise. I'm using the eBay platform and I'm paying eBay for every sale and a subscription service. My product should be shown fairly. But eBay comes along and says, well, if you want to edge out your competition, pay extra. And this was a direct attribution type system initially. If a potential buyer, clicked on one of your listings and purchased the item, you would be charged the promoted listing fee. Okay? It was direct. The connection made sense. It was logical. I got the sale, eBay gets to collect a little more money. But it stopped being logical along the way. When eBay introduced the halo concept, it started to get even sketchier. So the underlying question is, does advertising sell product? Well, it draws attention to product, as I've said in my other videos. But does it sell it? I think actually all the other terms, condition of the product, what you're offering, those are what actually sell the product. But you can't sell it if you can't draw attention to it. and in a category that's overcrowded and there's a lot of competition, nudging up your listing in the responses to a search result can have positive effect. But it's got to be realistic. eBay has never convinced me that promoted listings actually help sell my product, because you can't prove a negative. They send me numbers all the time that say, this item sold with promoted listings, here's your fee, you made the sale because of promoted listings. But did I? Would the person have bought it anyway? Because I have a reasonable product at a reasonable price that shows good value, would the buyer have bought it anyway? There's no data that shows me what the buyer did and why they did it. They just simply clicked on a promoted listing, eBay gets paid. But would they have bought the item anyway? And that's a question eBay's never been able to answer, regardless of the amount of information they send you telling you how promoted listing worked for you. We've been expecting this change to promoted listings ever since they rolled it out earlier in the year in places like Germany and Australia. Over there, it was not received well. Why? Because people, sellers, saw the promoted listing charges climb to 80, 85, 90% of their items were getting attributed to promoted listings. And as I say, eBay's never convinced me that the sales were made because of promoted listings. So we've been watching it. And sure enough, even though they didn't mention it at the seller update, I got a message in from the eBay system for 2 of my 3 stores. Now, oddly, the 3rd store was never notified that the change was going to slip into effect on January 13th. Very low key, like a thief in the night. They're not drawing attention to it, but it's a big change. Let's get into that. So what's the change and why is it upsetting sellers? Well, eBay has found yet another way to collect more money under the promoted listing program. And ever since it was introduced back in 2015, taken an increasing percentage of our profit away from us. And anything that steals our profit, especially if the service they're claiming they're collecting it for is questionable, we notice. Rose tells me that the average eBay percentage by the time you pay the final value fees, you pay the promoted listing fees, is up above 20%. So eBay's taking on average about 20% of the sale price of any item we list. It varies among categories, and it varies with the promoted listing percentage we use. Now, if you go back 10 years, I would be getting calls regularly from this lady at eBay, from their business office, telling me all about this new program. And she'd call me about every week or so, and she'd try to convince me that promoted listing was going to make sales better. And I had my doubts then, and I have even more doubts today because of the change. While I was speaking to her, I compared it to the Washington State carpool lanes. And that surprised her a bit, but I said, up around Seattle on I-5, we have a congestion problem. Too much traffic for the width of the roads that were built, when this was a much smaller place. So they came up with the idea of introducing carpools, and then they restricted who could use them. Cars with more than 2 people, passenger buses, tourist buses crammed full of people, but they restricted who could use the carpool lane. If you could get into the carpool lane, you moved along faster in traffic. You could look over there at the people with 1 person in the car and you can say, you poor slob, you should get in the carpool lane. The carpool lanes weren't paying off, so they came up with another idea. They decided to let companies and individuals buy into the carpool lane. They could pay a fee, and companies like Microsoft and Amazon, which were based out of here, they started buying the access into the carpool lane for their employees. So now the carpool lanes were crammed with people, 1 person per car, and they were just as slow as the other lanes. And this was the point I made to the lady. I said, if there was no promoted listings, my listings would have to compete on merit. Price, value, details, shipping, return policies. And if mine were better, I would go up in the listing responses. If mine weren't as good, I would go down. That's a fair, even playing field. Now you're saying that if I simply pay you extra money, I will get pushed ahead of better listings, better products in better condition. She said, yeah, but you're just paying for advertising. It's just another form of advertising. And I say, well, who am I ahead of? And she says, well, you're ahead of all those people who don't pay even 1%, because the rate was 1% then, minimum, 1% minimum. And I said, okay, so I'm edging out the people who don't believe in your program. What about the people who are willing to pay 2 or 3% because they've got the items in mass quantity? They're bringing products in from China. They've got Connex boxes and warehouses full of an individual product. I can't compete with those people. Those companies can put their products on eBay and they can say 5%, 6%, 7%. So I have simply wasted my 1%. Well, then eBay came along and made the minimum 2%. So overnight, they doubled the minimum fee. It was wonderful for shareholders. And I think eBay really got a taste for the idea that the money collected from promoted listings was huge. In fact, now that the recommendations are rarely in the single digit, when you look at your template and eBay gives you a recommendation in a specific category about how high you should put in your promoted listing percentage to compete, it's 12%, 15%. I've seen 20%. So right there, they're saying, give us more money. And if you look below that and you read it, it says, your ad rate is low. If you don't give us money, we're not going to show your listing to people. I mean, it's right there on the template. So they're encouraging you as the years go by to use the program and pay them more money, regardless of whether you're convinced that paying them the extra money is doing little more than wadding it up and throwing it in the trash can. Because you really can't compete with those people who are doing huge volumes, because they just write it into their cost analysis. They've got accountants sitting there figuring out that they don't have to make as much percentage per item as you do, because they're clicking volume over and over. You're out there struggling, selling one-offs or two-offs or maybe 10. So eBay's made this change. What is the change? Well, it started out with direct attribution 10 years ago. If I sold something under the promoted listings program, it was called, I think, standard then, and well, originally it was just called promoted listings because there was only one variation. But we're talking about promoted listings general or standard. And you would set your percentage when you were creating your listing, saying, oh, I'll do 1%, I'll do 2%, I'll do 5%, or I've got so many of these and I paid so little for them, I'll do 10%, and I want to achieve a higher ranking. I want to be returned in those search results. And at least it seemed logical. You could say, eBay gets paid because eBay helped me sell. Well, then they came up with halo listings, and this got a little sketchier. I mean, frankly, way sketchier. The idea was that if a buyer clicks into my store, looks at an item, doesn't buy that item, but comes back at some point, the time frame varies, but comes back at some point and buys any other item in my store, I have to pay the promoted listing, even if they didn't click in to that item. eBay is saying that, well, they ended up in your store because of us, so therefore you should pay us. Little sketchier. But this one they're going to introduce in January, it's absurd. It is downright sketchy. It basically says that if a buyer clicks on an item, doesn't buy it, goes away and never comes back, a 30-day clock has started. And if any other buyer buys the item, even if they didn't come in through the promoted listing program, you will pay the promoted listing fee. There's no direct connection. There's no correlation. It's simply a cash grab. And that's a term that's being tossed around about this policy because eBay's got a taste for the amount of money they can collect through the promoted listings program, and they just keep making it more and more expensive. People in Australia, Germany, those who've been living with it for a while now, they say it's really pushed up their annual overall fees for promoted listing. They're making less, eBay's making more. And for no additional service. You're paying a fee, but there's no direct correlation to selling the item you were willing to promote. So you're being charged for a non-service, and it's upsetting people. So the key question is, did that promoted listing fee help sell that product? And the answer after January 13th will be, no, it didn't. It just paid eBay more money. But it's a trust issue. I neither like nor trust eBay's promoted listing program or their motives for running it. It is not to put the best listings in front of the buyers who want to buy a product. I ran into this just the other day when I ordered a part for my microwave. I put in the brand, the part number, put in the model, put in the number of the part itself, and eBay gave me back a page full of responses. So I looked at the return policies, and I looked at the shipping time, made sure it was an American buyer so I wasn't waiting on the tariff problem from China, and it came in. Wasn't a match, wasn't even close. Why did eBay give me that response to a very specific search? I said, I want this part for this model microwave. Well, that person was promoting. So they were pushed up in the ranking even though they were not a fit for my request. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. After January 13th, they're no longer going to be performance-based. It's not going to be that if you have good pictures and you write a good listing and you have good terms that you get the sale. It's going to be based on who pays more money to get their product shown in front of people, in front of potential buyers. Now let's think a minute about multi-quantity listings. Now these are those that you might have 20 of, 50 of, 200 of, and I've got a number of multi-quantity listings. And that pretty much means that anytime I list a multi-quantity listing and I give it a promoted listing amount, a percentage, I have to figure I'm going to be charged that promoted listing fee. Why? Because if I sell one, then that means that someone has clicked into that listing. So for 30 days, if anybody else clicks in, that first sale's already triggered the attribution. If anybody else looks, it gets triggered again. Because that's the thing, is every time somebody looks, and if you have more sales, people are going to see your product more than your competition, in theory. So that means that there will be a perpetual 30-day clock that simply keeps moving along until you exhaust your supply. And I was talking to Rose about this morning, and she says, pretty much you have to figure that if you're putting a percentage for promoted listing on your listing, you've lost that money. eBay has found some way between the halos, the direct attributions, the general promoted listing program, this new priority promoted listing program, they've found some way to claim that money. So you can take it as a loss on the day you list it. It will be rare that you will not be paying a promoted listing. It's like it's become the new norm. Now, one interesting thing about the difference between general promoted listings and priority, and they've had other names. For instance, priority has been called advanced promoted listings at some point. General has been called standard at some point. But basically, the general is the direct attribution. Somebody clicks in and buys, you pay the promoted listing. Priority, on the other hand, is even more intrusive into your pocketbook. It's the pay per click. Regardless of whether you sell, every time somebody clicks, you pay. Really, really aggressive pricing, really aggressive advertising. You can lose your entire profit if it's a popular item that people are going to be clicking on, but there are a lot of choices and they click, check yours, move on to the next one, click, check theirs, move on to the next one, click, and pick one of the several hundred responses the search engine gives them. Coming back to my microwave part, I was looking for a longer one. I probably clicked on 30 or 40 different listings and kept finding that eBay was giving me these shorter ones. I will have triggered 30 or 40 just trying to search and define the part I needed. And result will be that 30 or 40 different sellers will be charged for the promoted listing fees if their part sells within 30 days. It's not my intent. I'm not trying to hurt those sellers. I'm trying to find a very specific part. and eBay's search engine was not returning searched accurate items. They were they were basically returning page after page of latch, microwave door latch, and I was looking for a specific door latch. So they were returning page after page, and I was having to open them and close them and open them and close them. And I wasn't thinking about it at the time because I hadn't received the message. So my actions will have tripped 30, 40 different promoted listing attributions when I do that in the future. I've never tried priority promoted listings. I've never wanted to do the click per view. I'm not even happy with the pay to play concept of the old promoted listings. I'm certainly not happy with the click per view. But I guess if you were in an intense, overcrowded market, you would be the player for that because you have to draw attention to your items. After the January change, that the top slots on the search results will go to those sellers who have priority promoted listings turned on. They're paying so much extra, they get the top slots. But if there's not a suitable seller with promoted priority turned on, it will go to some random average non-promoted listing. And I find that odd too, because you would think the people who are paying promoted general would be the next choice the algorithm would present. But regardless, in either case, it's not producing, the search results are not producing a best match, best fit. They're producing most money collected. At least that's my opinion on this. Now, here's a point. It says that any click on the listing. So does that mean as a seller, if I go in to make an alteration or a change or improve the photos to my own listing, or I'm asked a question and then I open it up to see whether I've provided the answer already in the listing, will I trigger my own 30-day attribution window? Yeah, it says any click. So does that mean every time I go into one of my own listings that I'll be charging myself by triggering the 30-day attribution window for myself? That's when I'll really be watching to see how it turns out. People all over the internet are calling this a cash grab, and I think it's a good name for it. It really is just eBay having had a taste of what kind of money we're talking about for their promoted listing program. They're out there to collect even more of it, and they're collecting it on the backs of sellers, and they're doing it without adding any value or providing any additional service in the way of advertising. They're just simply taking more profit from you. After I got my message, I went out and I looked at a couple of sources, other content creators that I follow regularly who have bigger communities. One of them is Ryan at Galaxy. He did a couple of very nice videos on the topic of the new promoted listing. Another one is Justin Resells. It's a shorter video. It's only about 6 minutes long, but I think he has some good analysis in there. And lastly, John over at Flippin' Ain't Easy. He introduces a little flow chart, so you can see how this works that way if you're into flow charts. In all cases, I think it's almost a universal concept among every video I've watched on the topic that this is not good for resellers. This is only good for eBay. So what are we going to do about it? Each of us as sellers has to decide how we're going to respond for this. What happens when you get charged more for no more service, or you get charged more for even less service? Well, first we get upset. And then we have to analyze. The change is coming. That's the first thing you have to accept. It's eBay's sandbox. The change is coming. They did it in Europe. They did it in Australia. They've done it elsewhere. They're going to do it in Canada. They're doing it here in the U.S. They've already said it's on its way. And you even know the date, January 13th. So between now and then, you've got some basic decisions to make. You've got to decide what your initial response is going to be, and then you can study it and you can amend your response. We've been promoting at 5% in the general program. So will we continue that? Will we back it off to say 4%? Because if our total number of listings sold under promoted increases, we will be charged more on the larger scale. So do we back off our percentage to 4% to adjust for that, or 3%? Do we scrutinize the individual listings more than we used to and say, instead of just 5% on every listing as a rule, do we say, well, I've got the only one on eBay, or I've got one of very few on eBay. I'm only going to promote it 2%, or I'm not going to promote at all. If I've got the only one, even a reasonable search engine should give my item as a result in someone's search. I have my doubts about that too. But should I decrease my percentage? Should I stop using promoted listing entirely and see how it affects my business? I sold on eBay before promoted listings, before 2015. Can I continue to sell on eBay after? Especially if I'm drawing down the size of my stores because I'm trying to enjoy retirement and I'm spending a lot of time creating YouTube videos. So if I'm listing less, can I actually get away with eliminating promoted listings? That's something I would have to try and then watch the results, or watch other content creators and see what their results are from the actions they've decided to take. Should I change to priority promoted listings and really pay more so I can have my shot at that top slot advertising box like Amazon's buy box? And that's something I probably never will do, because I'm not in the market of retail arbitrage or have a huge percentage of my listings up as multi-quantities so that I've got 50 or 100 or 200 of an item and I'm trying to dominate the market. So that's a choice I probably won't make, but depending on what you sell, you might want to consider it. Should I change platforms? Should I finally say that, this is like the old story of death by 1,000 cuts? Should I simply say, all right, eBay, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back? Should I stop using the platform? After 20 odd years of having eBay accounts, should I simply shut down the eBay portion of my reselling business? These are the days that make me really wonder if, with all the additional fees and all the increases and all the problems with AI and policy violations, is it finally time to say, I'm done? Because paying more fees and not getting any more sales than I did before the fee increase is absurd. It really is. eBay's moving away from the realm of a useful platform to augment my reselling business to absurdity.